Footsteps echoed steadily on the pavement until the sudden blare of a police siren shattered the morning calm. A power-hungry patrolman had just slapped handcuffs on a black man in a bespoke suit for simply walking down the street. He had no idea his victim was the city's newly elected mayor. Morning traffic hummed along the avenue as Leland Rhodes adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit. He had just won the most contentious mayoral election in the city's history on a platform of sweeping institutional reform and police accountability. After weeks of relentless demands, endless motorcades, and suffocating security details, he made a rare impulsive decision that morning. He would walk to work. City Hall was only a short distance from his downtown townhouse. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue, and Leland wanted a few moments of solitude to clear his head before a difficult budget meeting. He had sent his driver and chief of staff ahead with his leather briefcase, which held his briefing binders, cell phone, and wallet. Leland did not think twice. He simply wanted to feel the pavement beneath his feet and blend in with the citizens he had been elected to serve. A short distance away, Officer Derek Vance sat idling in his patrol cruiser, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. Vance was built like a linebacker and carried a reputation within the department for being unnecessarily aggressive. He had a massive chip on his shoulder and a disciplinary file that previous commanders had quietly overlooked. Vance viewed the city not as a community to protect, but as territory to dominate. He thrived on the power his badge gave him and often targeted people he deemed out of place in the more affluent downtown districts. As Vance slowly rolled past the upscale boutiques and artisanal coffee shops, his eyes locked onto a tall black man walking purposefully toward the municipal district. The man wore an impeccably tailored double-breasted navy suit that cost more than Vance made in a month. Vance narrowed his eyes. In his twisted view, the sight did not compute. The man looked too confident, too comfortable in a neighborhood Vance subconsciously policed with heavy racial bias. His mind instantly began composing a narrative. Suspicious individual checking out high-end storefronts, probably a con artist or someone who had just stolen a very expensive outfit. Without a second thought, Vance hit the lights. The flashing red and blue reflected off the glass facades. He accelerated aggressively, pulled the cruiser onto the curb, and cut off the sidewalk directly in front of Leland. Leland stopped, brow furrowing in mild confusion. He took a step back as the cruiser door swung open violently. "Hold it right there, don't move another inch," Vance barked, hand resting menacingly on his utility belt as he stepped out. Leland stood perfectly still, posture relaxed yet commanding. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked in his deep resonant baritone that commanded respect in every boardroom and council chamber. "I'll ask the questions here," Vance snapped, closing the distance. He looked Leland up and down, a sneer curling his lip. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I'm walking to work," Leland replied calmly, keeping his hands visible and relaxed at his sides. He noted the officer's name tag and the aggressive stance, the hand hovering near the taser, the immediate escalation of a situation that required none. "Walking to work," Vance repeated mockingly. "Sure you are in a suit like that. Where did you get it? Did you borrow it, or did it fall off the back of a truck?" Leland's jaw tightened infinitesimally. He had spent his entire life navigating this exact brand of thinly veiled racism, but experiencing it now as the highest-ranking elected official in the city ignited a cold, quiet fury within him. He realized in an instant that this was exactly what his constituents had been protesting. This was the rot he had promised to cut out of the department. "I bought it at a store," Leland said, tone perfectly even, refusing to rise to the bait. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a very important meeting at City Hall and I am on a tight schedule." Vance let out a harsh laugh. "City Hall? What, are you late for your shift stripping the floors? Listen to me very carefully. You fit the description of a suspect we've had burglarizing offices in this district. So you're going to stand exactly where you are, keep your mouth shut, and hand over your ID." Leland sighed softly, patting his pockets out of habit, though he already knew the answer. "I don't have my ID on me. My wallet is in my briefcase, which my staff took ahead to my office." Vance's eyes lit up with predatory triumph. "No ID? What a shock. Let me guess. You forgot your name too?" "My name is Leland Rhodes," he said clearly, locking eyes with the officer. He waited for the name to register. It had been plastered on billboards, lawn signs, and television screens for months, but Vance, drowning in his own arrogance and prejudice, did not make the connection. To him, Leland Rhodes was just another name, and the man before him was just another target who dared to talk back. "Right, Leland," Vance sneered, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with a sharp metallic clack. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're being detained." "Officer Vance," Leland said, voice dropping an octave and carrying a warning anyone else would have heeded immediately. "I strongly advise you to think about what you are doing. If you make a quick radio call to your dispatcher or simply look at my face and remember who won the election last week, you will save yourself a career-ending mistake." Vance's face flushed with anger. The sheer audacity of this man, this suspect, giving him orders was more than his fragile ego could handle. "I said turn around," he roared, lunging forward. He grabbed Leland's shoulder roughly, spun him around, and slammed him chest first against the hood of the patrol cruiser. The metal was cold against Leland's cheek. He felt the rough, bruising grip as his arms were wrenched behind his back. Leland did not resist. He went completely limp, offering zero physical opposition. He knew the law perfectly. He knew that the moment he pushed back, Vance would have legal cover to escalate to violence. His mind remained razor-sharp, cataloging every second, every word, every violation of protocol: illegal stop, unlawful detention, excessive force. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Leland's wrists. Vance clicked them shut, ratcheting them unnecessarily tight. "You people always have a story," Vance hissed into Leland's ear as he patted him down aggressively, hands roughly checking the tailored pockets of the suit. "Always trying to act like you run the place. Save myself a mistake, I'm the law out here, buddy. You're just a perp with no ID and a bad attitude." "You are disgraced to that badge," Leland replied, voice muffled against the hood, yet remarkably steady, "and you are currently kidnapping the mayor of this city." Vance froze for a fraction of a second, then burst into loud, mocking laughter. He grabbed Leland by the bicep and yanked him upright. "The mayor," he laughed, practically dragging Leland toward the back door of the cruiser. "That's a new one. Usually you guys claim to be undercover feds or sovereign citizens, but the mayor? Wow, I should call the psychiatric ward instead of the precinct." Vance shoved Leland's head down and pushed him into the cramped, hard plastic back seat. Leland adjusted himself as best he could, shoulders aching from the unnatural angle of his cuffed hands. He looked up through the metal mesh partition as Vance slammed the door shut, trapping him in the suffocating stale air of the police vehicle. Vance climbed into the driver's seat, grinning from ear to ear. He genuinely believed he had made a righteous bust. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, Bravo. I have one male suspect in custody. Refusal to identify, matching the description of our downtown burglar, transporting him to Central Holding." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy 4, Bravo. Do you have a name for the suspect?" "He claims his name is Leland Rhodes," Vance said, unable to keep the smirk out of his voice. "Also claims to be the mayor. Might want to have a psych eval waiting." There was a brief pause. "Copy that, 4 Bravo. Proceed to Central." Vance threw the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, the siren giving a brief, aggressive yelp to clear the intersection. In the rearview mirror, he made eye contact with Leland. "So, Mr. Mayor," he taunted as they drove down the bustling streets, "what's on the agenda today? Going to pass a law against getting arrested for stealing suits?" "My agenda," Leland said quietly, eyes dark and unblinking in the mirror, "was to finalize the city's new budget, specifically the allocation of funds for the police department. But I believe I'll be adding an emergency review of patrol protocols and officer conduct to the top of my list." "Keep dreaming, pal," Vance scoffed, taking a corner too fast and intentionally throwing Leland off balance in the back seat. "By the time I'm done processing you, you'll be sitting in a cell waiting for a public defender who doesn't care about your delusions of grandeur. You think you can walk through my streets looking like you own them? I'm putting you exactly where you belong." Leland remained silent for the rest of the ride. He did not need to say another word. He simply watched the city roll by through the grated window. He watched the people on the sidewalks, the people who had trusted him to fix a broken system. For years, he had heard testimonies of young men harassed, belittled, and physically assaulted by officers just like Vance. He had read the reports. He had promised to change it. But feeling the tight bite of the metal on his wrists and the utter helplessness of being locked in a cage by a man holding a gun, and a badge crystallized his mission in a way no briefing document ever could. As the cruiser approached the rear entrance of the Central Police Precinct, a massive brutalist concrete structure located directly adjacent to City Hall, Vance hit the horn to get the security gate to open. "End of the line, Your Honor," he mocked, pulling into the secured sally port. He parked, killed the engine, and stepped out. Inside the precinct, Chief of Police Franklin Holt was standing by the front desk, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee and glancing at his watch. Holt was a veteran of the force, a tough, pragmatic man who had spent recent weeks sweating over the new mayor's proposed police reforms. He had a meeting scheduled with Mayor Rhodes shortly to discuss the department's overtime budget. Holt's phone buzzed. It was a frantic text from Dominic Hale, the mayor's chief of staff. Chief Holt, the mayor decided to walk to work. He hasn't arrived. He doesn't have his phone or ID. Please tell me your officers haven't seen anything unusual. Holt felt a sudden icy knot form in his stomach. He looked up just as the heavy metal doors of the Sally Port buzzed open and Officer Derek Vance marched through, aggressively gripping the arm of a tall black man in a severely wrinkled bespoke navy suit, hands cuffed tightly behind his back. Vance was grinning like he had just won the lottery. Leland Rhodes looked directly across the booking room and locked eyes with the chief of police. The blood drained completely from Chief Holt's face. The coffee cup slipped from his trembling hand and shattered on the linoleum floor, splashing dark liquid across the polished tiles. The loud crash echoed through the suddenly dead silent precinct. Porcelain shards scattered, a sharp, dissonant sound that caused every desk sergeant, detective, and patrol officer in the massive room to freeze. Chief Franklin Holt ignored the scalding coffee soaking into his trousers. His wide, terrified eyes were locked onto the man standing beside Officer Derek Vance. Vance, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality, puffed out his chest. He hauled Leland forward by the bicep, misinterpreting the chief's stunned silence as awe at his proactive policing. "Caught him prowling around the avenue, Chief," Vance announced, voice booming proudly across the dead quiet booking floor. "Refused to provide identification, highly combative attitude, fits the profile of the commercial burglary ring we've been tracking. I'm bringing him in for processing and a prolonged hold." Silence hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. No one moved. The desk sergeant, a veteran named Silas Reed, slowly lowered his radio, face draining of color as he recognized the man in the handcuffs. "Vance," Chief Holt choked out, voice barely a raspy whisper. He took a stumbling step forward, hands trembling. What have you done?" "Just doing my job, sir," Vance replied with a smug grin plastered across his face. He gave Leland another completely unnecessary shove toward the booking desk. "This guy actually tried to tell me he was the mayor. Can you believe the nerve? They'll say anything to avoid a cell." "Take them off," Holt commanded, the whisper suddenly erupting into a deafening roar that rattled the bulletproof glass of the holding cells. "Take the handcuffs off him right now." Vance blinked, genuinely startled. His grin faltered. "Chief, with all due respect, this suspect is undocumented and non-compliant. Standard operating procedure dictates—" "I don't care about your procedure, you monumental idiot!" Holt sprinted across the remaining distance and shoved Vance aside with such force that the younger officer slammed into the edge of the booking counter. Holt did not wait for Vance to find his keys. He frantically dug into his own duty belt, hands shaking violently as he pulled out his universal cuff key. "Mr. Mayor," Holt stammered, voice cracking with sheer panic as he stepped behind Leland. "Sir, I cannot express, I am so profoundly sorry." The metallic click of the handcuffs unlocking echoed loudly. Leland Rhodes brought his arms forward slowly. He did not rub his wrists. He did not stretch. He simply turned around. Posture immaculate despite the wrinkled suit, expression a mask of cold, unyielding authority. Vance stood frozen against the counter. The words "Mr. Mayor" finally penetrated his thick skull, ricocheting around his brain as the pieces horrifyingly clicked into place. The bespoke suit, the calmness, the name Leland Rhodes, the election signs he had driven past for months. All the blood drained from Vance's face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. His stomach violently plummeted. The absolute, unmitigated arrogance that had fueled his entire career evaporated in a single heartbeat, replaced by cold, suffocating terror. "Chief Holt," Leland said, deep baritone cutting through the silence like a scalpel. He did not raise his voice, but the sheer gravity of his tone commanded the absolute attention of every single soul in the building. "I appreciate your assistance. However, an apology will not suffice." "Sir, this is a horrific misunderstanding," Holt pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Officer Vance is a junior patrolman. He made a catastrophic error in judgment. I will have him suspended immediately, pending a full review." "It was not an error in judgment, Chief," Leland corrected softly, locking his dark eyes onto Holt. "An error in judgment is misreading a street sign. What Officer Vance executed today was an unlawful detainment, an illegal search, and an egregious abuse of power fueled by racial profiling. He didn't stop me because I looked like a burglar. He stopped me because I am a black man in a wealthy neighborhood, and he felt entitled to humiliate me. Leland slowly turned his gaze to Vance. The young officer visibly shrank, broad shoulders collapsing under the crushing weight of his own colossal mistake. "You were informed of my identity, Officer Vance," Leland said, voice terrifyingly calm. "I offered you the opportunity to verify it. You chose instead to mock me, physically assault me, and kidnap me under the color of law. You told me you were the law on these streets. You told me I was exactly where I belonged." Vance's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. I I didn't know," he squeaked, voice cracking pitifully. "Sir, I swear, if I had known you were the mayor—" "That is exactly the problem," Leland interrupted, voice finally rising and echoing off the concrete walls. "If you had known I was the mayor, you would have treated me with respect, but because you thought I was just a citizen, you treated me like an animal. How many other men have you put in handcuffs just because you didn't like the look of them? How many lives have you ruined because they didn't have the political power to fight back?" Leland turned back to the chief, jaw set. "Chief Holt, our budget meeting is canceled. Instead, we are having an emergency disciplinary hearing right here, right now. I want the head of internal affairs down here immediately. I want the district attorney notified of an unlawful arrest. And I want this man stripped of his badge and his firearm before I take another breath in this building." "Yes, Mr. Mayor," Holt said instantly, not hesitating for a fraction of a second. He turned to Vance, eyes blazing with fury. "Vance, badge and gun on the desk, now." "Chief, please," Vance begged, tears welling as the reality of his ruined life crashed down. "My pension, my career, I have a family." "You should have thought about them before you decided to play tyrant," Holt spat. "Disarm yourself, or I will have the desk sergeant do it for you." With trembling hands, Vance unclipped his duty weapon and placed it on the counter. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest, fingers lingering on the metal before setting it down beside the gun. In mere minutes, he had gone from an untouchable predator to a disgraced, unemployed civilian facing severe criminal charges. "Mr. Mayor!" Dominic Hale, Leland's chief of staff, burst through the front double doors of the precinct, panting heavily and followed closely by a frantic security detail. Hale took one look at Leland rubbing his wrists and then at the disarmed Vance and stopped dead in his tracks. "Leland, what happened?" "I was just getting a first-hand look at the daily operations of our patrol division, Dominic," Leland said coldly, "and I have decided that sweeping reforms are no longer a campaign promise. They are today's immediate executive order." The fallout was biblical. Leland Rhodes did not let the incident get swept under the rug, as so many police misconduct cases had been in the past. He refused to accept the quiet resignation of Officer Derek Vance. Instead, he weaponized the absolute nightmare of his morning to enact the most aggressive, systematic purge of police corruption the city had ever seen. By midday, Leland held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. He stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, still wearing the wrinkled navy suit, wrists visibly bruised from the over-tightened metal. He detailed exactly what had happened, word for word. He exposed Vance's arrogance, mockery, and blatant violation of civil rights. The footage from Vance's own dashboard and body cameras, which Leland had immediately ordered secured by the district attorney, was released to the public. The city erupted. The undeniable visual evidence of the mayor himself being brutalized, mocked, and illegally arrested by a smirking, arrogant cop destroyed any defensive narrative the police union tried to mount. Vance became the national face of institutional racism and police overreach. His name was plastered across every major news network, not as a hero of the law, but as a cowardly bully who had finally picked on the wrong target. But Leland knew that firing Vance was not enough. It was not about vengeance. It was about justice. If Vance had done this to the mayor, he had undoubtedly done it to dozens of vulnerable citizens who had no voice. Leland appointed an independent civilian oversight committee armed with unprecedented subpoena power to audit the entire precinct. They started with Derek Vance's sealed internal affairs files. What they found was horrific but completely unsurprising. Over his years on the force, Vance had accumulated a long string of excessive force complaints, numerous allegations of racial profiling, and multiple reports of unlawful detention. Every single one had been dismissed, minimized, or buried by his commanding officers. Vance had not been a bad apple. He was the product of a poisoned tree. The hard karma hit Vance like a runaway freight train. The district attorney, feeling immense political pressure and armed with undeniable video evidence, indicted Vance on multiple felony charges: false imprisonment, official misconduct, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Vance's trial was a swift, humiliating spectacle. The defense tried to argue he had made an honest mistake, a simple procedural error in a high-stress environment. But the prosecution simply played the body cam footage of Vance laughing, taunting, and telling the mayor, "I'm putting you exactly where you belong." When the verdict was read, Vance stood trembling at the defense table, guilty on all counts. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for dirty cops, did not grant leniency. She sentenced Derek Vance to a term in federal prison. As the bailiff approached to put Vance in handcuffs, the disgraced cop looked back at the gallery. Sitting in the front row, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a stern, unreadable expression, was Mayor Leland Rhodes. The irony was suffocating. The very handcuffs Vance had aggressively snapped onto Leland's wrists were now being placed onto his own. He was being led away, stripped of his power, his freedom, and his dignity. Chief Franklin Holt did not survive the purge either. While he had not arrested the mayor, his complicity in bearing Vance's past complaints made his position untenable. He was forced into early retirement, his reputation permanently tarnished, and replaced by a progressive commissioner brought in from out of state to completely rebuild the department's culture. In the years that followed, Leland Rhodes transformed the city. He implemented strict community policing protocols, mandated severe penalties for officers who failed to activate their body cameras, and established a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. Funding previously allocated for militarized police equipment was aggressively redirected into community mental health response teams and after-school programs in marginalized neighborhoods. The city's crime rate did not skyrocket as the union had fearmongered. Instead, community trust in the department slowly began to heal. Citizens actually began cooperating with detectives, knowing the officers were there to protect them, not to prey on them. Years later, Derek Vance was released from prison. He was a convicted felon, unemployable in law enforcement or private security. His pension had been completely revoked due to his felony conviction related to his official duties. His wife had left him during his incarceration. Unable to bear the public shame and financial ruin, Vance found himself living in a cramped, dingy studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city, a neighborhood he used to aggressively patrol and harass. To pay his rent, he took a minimum wage job working the night shift at a commercial laundry facility, spending long hours sorting and washing uniforms for the city's sanitation department. One evening, as Vance was hauling a heavy canvas cart of soiled coveralls across the damp concrete floor, he glanced up at the small, static-filled television mounted in the corner of the break room. The evening news was on. The anchor was reporting live from a massive ribbon-cutting ceremony downtown. Standing at the podium, looking distinguished and powerful, was Governor Leland Anthony Rhodes, celebrating his recent landslide victory in the state election. The crowd was cheering wildly, celebrating a man who had actually kept his promises to clean up the streets, starting with the police department. Vance stood there sweating through his cheap, stained t-shirt, hands calloused and blistered. He watched the man he had once mocked, the man he had thrown against the hood of a car just because he felt like it, accepting the highest office in the state. He looked down at his own hands, remembering the satisfying click of the handcuffs he used to wield like a weapon. He had truly believed he owned the city. He had believed he was untouchable. Vance turned away from the television, grabbed the handles of his laundry cart, and pushed the heavy load back into the sweltering heat of the washroom, facing the brutal, inescapable reality that he had indeed been put exactly where he belonged. This story of power, prejudice, and instant accountability likely left you on the edge of your seat. The arrogance of power was completely shattered when Officer Vance picked the wrong target, proving that nobody is above the law. Mayor Rhodes's courage transformed a humiliating arrest into sweeping real-life changes for his city. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of power, prejudice, and ultimate accountability, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing true-to-life storytelling. After watching this story, the strongest feeling that remains is relief that accountability finally caught up with someone who abused their authority. What stood out most was not the surprise reveal, but the reminder that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are or how they look. Respect should never depend on someone's title or position. I'm curious what stayed with you the most. Was it the traffic stop itself? the moment the officer realized who he had detained, or the changes that followed afterward. And do you think experiences like this can encourage better leadership and stronger community trust over time? One lesson I took from this story is that taking a moment to listen, stay professional, and avoid making assumptions can completely change the outcome of an interaction. Those small choices matter in everyday life, whether we are at work or simply meeting someone new. If this story gave you something to think about, I would truly love to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore accountability, fairness, and justice, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you think it is worth your time.